In 1959, my brother Harry, who was 17 years older than I was, he was a graduate entomologist and he got his degree from LSU in 1940. But because of the war, he was not able to use his degree. After the war, when he was discharged and returned home, he needed something to do. So he went back to his profession and applied for a job. He saw an ad in the Times-Picayune, and there was a company in New Orleans looking for an entomologist. So he went to New Orleans, and lo and behold, the man that owned that company was an ex-navigator on a B-24, and my brother Harry was a pilot on a B-24. So they hit it off well. And he ended up getting a job, and he worked for those people for 3 years in New Orleans as their entomologist. Well, he got intrigued by the business from that tenure. And he kept encouraging me, come home on weekends. His family was here and he was over there, and he would go back and forth. And eventually he convinced me that that was a thing for me to do. At the time, I had a modest job working for a freight company as a terminal manager in Crowley. Wasn't making much money. I was married. We had one child, and my wife was expecting a second. And I was getting pressed for money. So it looked like a good opportunity to me to start. Little is known, unless the history of it is told, that back then you could not make a living in the termite pest control business. It's hard to believe it's so lucrative today, so much business, but back then no one knew about it, no one felt the need for it, and it took a while. Orkin spent millions of dollars in advertisement educating the public. My father owned about 40 rent houses in Crowley, and they had no knowledge of the scientific prospects of treating termites. All they did was change material out. They called them white ants. They would see the larvae, and they thought they were white ants. That's how uneducated the population was about termite work. You could not sell termite work. No one felt the need for it. It was very difficult to make a living then. On my way back from New Orleans, when I got the chemical and the equipment and all in the truck, and I was driving home, I stopped in Lafayette, and I had some friends of mine over there. I was anxious to tell them about the new venture. So they took me to a bowling alley, and there was a 12-lane bowling alley. It was called the Booker T. Washington Bowling Alley, and I sold a man a job to do a 12-lane bowling alley. He gave me $5, and boy, I was beside myself driving home with a $5 bill in my pocket and a signed receipt. The next one was Governor Edwin Edwards, lived in Crowley, newly married, had a house. He was my brother's attorney. And I set him up on a $3 a month charge. And I kept that account for probably 15 years until he moved out of Crowley. But those were the charges then. It wasn't enough to make a living. My mother had a little outdoor kitchen in the back of her house in South Crowley. Well, we had an old desk, and we put it in there, and we got Southern Bell then to install a landline. There were no cell phones. And we put that phone on the desk in that Breeze house, and that's where we were taking calls when we first started. We were glad to have it. I was sitting in the Breeze house when we first put the phone in and on the desk. We had a desk and a phone, nothing else in the building. I was sitting there and the phone rang. I couldn't imagine who was calling that number. It had just been installed and we had no advertisement. There was a lady on the phone. I said, "Good afternoon." She said, "Sir, do you all Orkin?" Well, I had enough common sense to know the woman was looking for pest control service. But what's profound about this is Orkin did such a phenomenal job on educating the consumer about pest control. They didn't ask for pest control, they asked for Orkin. So I said, "Yes, ma'am, we certainly do. Give me your address." And I jumped in my car and I went out and made $3. And then a nice piece of property on North Parkinson came available for sale. So we purchased it, and because of a lack of income, we put a convenience store on the front of it, and we put our office in the back, and the income created by the convenience store helped us pay the overhead. And so that worked out real good. We're still there after all these years. God has blessed us. When we first went in this business, not too many years after, we had a group of Benedictine monks that came from Still River, Massachusetts. I talk about them all the time. They came down here and befriended us, and my partner and I then, I had another investment, decided to support them financially. So they invited me to go to Still River. So the comptroller of the company and I bought tickets to Boston, and they picked us up and took us to Still River in their little transport van, and we were able to see what they were doing and spend a night in the monastery and have a couple of meals with them. Well, that relationship still exists today. I called them repeatedly to ask them to pray for the main thing I asked them to pray for is that good people come to us. Believe it or not, daily that happens. Without a doubt, the culture and bringing people into it who share that culture. You know, if you asked me what are the most important things in evaluating a new person, I would give you three things. I would give you work ethics to be first. I would give you integrity to be second. And the third and most important thing is the character of the individual. That's why we're very selective. And I feel that anyone who works for this company should be honored, because we are very, very particular about who comes to work for us. My phone has 5,000 reviews in it, and I'm not stretching it, over the past 3 years. If I read you some that bring tears to your eyes, that's what motivates me. That's what should motivate you. That's why J&J, you asked me what separates us from them? That's what separates us from them. If you don't feel compassion for that customer, as though you were dealing with your grandparents, and treat them in the same respectful vein, you do not belong with us, because that's completely opposite of what we try to do on every call. The exciting thing is for someone to place their faith and trust in us, because we don't have the image that the national companies have. We're still a small company. In spite of the fact that we're the largest independent in the state, we're still a small company. When word of mouth reaches a potential customer and they ring our phone, taking a chance on whether what they heard from their friends or relatives is real, and we go out and then we get a review that praises us to the high heaven, then I know that our people are doing what they're supposed to do, because that ends up being more word of mouth. And it goes on and on. It's like a brush fire. We've started it. I call it lightning in a bottle because God has placed His hand on us. My number one goal in life is not to limit the number, to grow this company inclusive of anybody who is looking for an opportunity to do something good for themselves, for their fellow workers, for the consumer, and for their family. And I want you, in some time in the future, to be able to see me when I circulate and come into your branch and assure me that what I'm telling you today has manifested itself in your job and that you found a career that gives you an opportunity to feed your family in a good way. So welcome to the family, welcome to the culture, and may God bless you and provide for you all that you desire to achieve here. Thank you.